Have you ever stood in a room so elegant, so powerful, and yet felt completely invisible? Have you ever wished that, just once, your voice could make the world stop and finally listen? That night, inside a glittering five-star hotel in New York, the air was thick with money, power, and pride. Every guest wore success like armor. Every conversation was calculated. And then a billionaire from the Middle East took the stage. He didn't speak English. He spoke in Arabic, fluent, commanding, confident, but no one understood a single word. The room went silent, not out of respect, but confusion. Waiters froze mid-step. Laughter died in people's throats. And then, from the far corner, a quiet voice replied in perfect Arabic. Not a diplomat, not a scholar, a black maid, holding a tray of crystal glasses, speaking with grace and fluency that silenced the entire room. In that moment, something shifted. Power changed hands, not through money, but through understanding. If that were you, surrounded by people who see through you, not at you, would you have the courage to speak? Would you stay silent or let your heart answer? This is not just a story about language. It's about dignity, humanity, and the power of being seen. Stay with me, because one woman's voice changed everything. If this story touches something in you, please like, share, and subscribe. And let's step into The Billionaire Spoke in Arabic. And only the black maid replied. The chandeliers of the Crystal Avenue Hotel glittered like 1,000 tiny suns above the ballroom. Waiters in crisp white jackets glided between the tables, their polished shoes whispering against marble floors. Silver trays carried champagne flutes that winked in the light. Outside, Manhattan hummed. But in here the air was heavy with power and money. It was the kind of evening where every movement seemed choreographed, every smile rehearsed, every word chosen for who might be listening. At the far end of the room, the grand piano played a soft rendition of Autumn Leaves. The guest business titans, senators, heirs, and socialites sipped their drinks and waited for the evening's guest of honor, Khalid Al-Rahman, the billionaire from Dubai, whose name alone made markets tremble. When the tall double doors opened, conversation dropped a note lower. Khalid entered slowly, flanked by two assistants. His tuxedo was perfect. His cufflinks glinted with the calm arrogance of a man who owned half the skyline. He smiled without warmth, nodding to the hosts, his eyes scanning the room with detached amusement. At a discreet corner near the back wall, Lydia Carter adjusted the tray in her hands, the weight of 12 crystal glasses pressed into her palms. Her black uniform was spotless, her movements practiced and quiet. She had served in this hotel for nearly 18 years. She knew how to move unseen. Still, a faint tremor rippled through her shoulders tonight. The staff had whispered all day about this dinner, the billionaire, the cameras, the press. Everyone wanted to impress him. Lydia kept her eyes low as she passed a group of laughing guests. She didn't mind serving. What unsettled her was the way some guests looked through her, as if she were part of the wallpaper, useful, but invisible. It was an old feeling, one she'd learned to live with. Mary Ann Lewis, the hotel manager, caught Lydia's eye from across the hall and gave a subtle nod. "Move faster." Lydia adjusted her pace, gliding toward the head table where Khalid now stood surrounded by admirers. Someone tapped a glass for silence. A soft chime echoed. The host, a rotund man with a politician's smile, raised his voice. "Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Mr. Khalid Al-Rahman." Applause rippled. Khalid inclined his head, acknowledging it with a faint smirk. Then, instead of responding in English, he spoke quietly, fluidly in Arabic. The sound was unexpected. Smooth vowels, sharp consonants, the rhythm ancient and commanding. Most guests froze, polite smiles faltering, a few attempted nervous laughter, pretending to understand. The host blinked, lost. Even the translator hesitated, unsure whether he should speak. Khalid's words rolled on for nearly a minute. Something about gratitude, culture, honor. His tone was casual yet deliberately opaque, a performance meant to remind everyone that he was the one in control. Then he paused, eyes sweeping across the crowd like a teacher waiting for a student to answer. Silence. A full 10 seconds of it. Crystal glasses clinked softly. Someone coughed. The pianist stopped mid-note, and then a voice came from the corner. It was gentle, but clear. A woman's voice, low and melodic. She answered him in flawless Arabic. Every head turned. The speaker was not a diplomat, not a scholar. It was Lydia, still holding her tray, her dark eyes calm, her tone even. She didn't look up. She simply replied to what he had said, thanking him for his kind words and adding, almost shyly, that hospitality is a language that transcends borders. For a moment, time fractured. The billionaire stared at her as if reality had slipped. The guests looked between them, stunned. A maid speaking Arabic fluently. It didn't fit their picture of the world. Khalid tilted his head, his expression unreadable. Then he laughed not kindly, but curious. "You speak Arabic," he said, this time in English, his accent thick. Lydia finally met his eyes. "A little," she replied softly. Her heart was hammering, but her voice didn't shake. The tension in the room sharpened. A few guests exchanged awkward smiles. Marianne, across the room, went pale. Khalid switched back to Arabic, asking another question short, clipped, testing her. Again. Lydia answered with perfect grammar, her pronunciation delicate yet sure. The words flowed like water. The silence that followed was heavier than applause. Even the air seemed to wait. For the first time that night, Khalid's composure cracked. His gaze softened, almost imperceptibly, and something old flickered behind his eyes' memory. Maybe. Then he straightened, the mask sliding back on. He smiled a tight smile. "Impressive," he said. "Did they train you for that here?" Lydia didn't answer. She lowered her gaze, stepping back into the shadow, blending once again with the quiet rhythm of service. But the echo of her voice lingered in the marble hall like perfume. No one spoke for a full minute. When the pianist finally resumed playing, his fingers trembled slightly. And somewhere near the kitchen door, Thomas Reyes whispered under his breath, "Well, I'll be damned." The room had been silenced not by wealth, not by power, but by a maid who remembered a forgotten language. After the banquet, the music drifted into softer tones. The chatter returned, cautious, as though people feared disturbing whatever had just happened. Lydia slipped through the service door, balancing her tray, her mind still humming with the sound of her own voice. It felt unreal, the way the words had left her lips, the way everyone had stared. She hadn't spoken Arabic out loud in years. Inside the staff corridor, fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. The air smelled of bleach and lemon polish. Lydia set the tray on the counter and took a slow breath. Her hands trembled slightly. She hadn't meant to draw attention. The words had simply escaped, like something long buried had surfaced on its own. Girl. What was that out there? Thomas Reyes appeared from the kitchen doorway, wiping his hands on a towel. His eyes were wide with a mix of disbelief and admiration. "You just stopped a billionaire mid-sentence." Lydia smiled faintly. I shouldn't have said anything. He shook his head. Oh, are you kidding? The way he looked at you like you just read his mind? He laughed quietly, lowering his voice. I've been working here 15 years, and I've never seen that ballroom so still. She tried to laugh with him, but the sound came out thin. It was nothing. He said something kind. I just replied. Thomas leaned on the counter, studying her. In perfect Arabic, Lydia's gaze dropped to her hands. It's been a long time. Thomas opened his mouth to say more, but Marianne appeared at the end of the corridor. Her heels clicked like a metronome. The warmth in the room vanished. Lydia, Marianne said briskly. A word. Please. Thomas muttered something under his breath and slipped away. Marianne folded her arms. What happened out there was unexpected. Lydia straightened. I'm sorry, ma'am. I didn't mean to interrupt. It's not about interruption, Marianne said, her tone sharp but not cruel. You handled yourself well, but you know our policy staff are to remain discreet. Some guests don't appreciate surprises. Lydia nodded. Understood. Marianne's expression softened slightly. Still, that was impressive. I had no idea you spoke another language. I used to, Lydia said quietly, before life got in the way. Marianne studied her for a long second, as if trying to decide whether to offer praise or caution. Then she simply said, Finish your shift. And, Lydia, be careful with guests like him. They notice everything. When Marianne left, the corridor fell silent again. Lydia leaned back against the wall, closing her eyes. The faint echo of Arabic words still lingered in her head, mingling with memories she had tried to forget. Later that night, after the ballroom emptied and the guests retreated to their suites, Lydia began her final rounds. She gathered linens, polished silver, and wiped down the marble counters. The city outside pulsed with midnight traffic. She could hear the faint rumble through the glass. As she worked, her mind drifted backward to a place half a world away. Cairo. She could still remember the heat, the scent of cardamom, the call to prayer echoing between sandstone walls. She had been 23 then, full of dreams. A scholarship student at the American University of Cairo, majoring in linguistics. Her father used to call her his little diplomat. She believed language could bridge worlds, that words could heal misunderstanding. But life had its own lessons. One evening, she received a call from home. Her mother had collapsed heart failure, sudden and cruel. Lydia returned to New York within days, leaving her studies unfinished. Bills stacked up. Her father's job at the docks barely covered rent. She promised herself she'd go back to school once things settled. They never did. The Crystal Avenue Hotel had been hiring. Just temporary, she told herself. That was 18 years ago. She wiped the counter with deliberate care, as if each stroke could erase the years between who she was and who she'd become. A sound behind her, the soft rustle of someone approaching. Lydia turned, expecting Thomas, but it was one of Khalid's assistants, a thin man in a dark suit. Miss Carter, he asked. She blinked. Yes, Mr. Al-Rahman would like to thank you for your translation earlier. His tone was polite but formal, as though delivering news from a higher realm. He requests your presence tomorrow morning, 10 o'clock, Suite 2101. Lydia hesitated. Is there a problem? No problem, the man said, offering a tight smile. Just a conversation. Before she could answer, he was gone. She stood there, staring at the corridor where he'd disappeared. The words replayed in her head. Suite 2101. She cleaned that room earlier that day, arranging orchids on the table, aligning the silver utensils just so. The thought of meeting the billionaire alone unsettled her. She finished her shift in silence, her steps heavy. When she finally left the hotel, the night air struck her cheeks like cool water. The city smelled of rain and asphalt. She walked toward the subway, her small apartment waiting on the Lower East Side, passing a bakery. She saw her reflection in the glass, the uniform, the tired eyes, the faint shadow of who she used to be. At home, the clock read 14 a.m. Lydia sat on the edge of her bed, removing her shoes. She stared at her hands, the same hands that once wrote essays in Arabic script, that once turned the pages of books about culture and diplomacy. She whispered the words Khalid had spoken earlier that night, tasting their rhythm again. Her accent hadn't faded. It had just been sleeping all these years. The next morning came too soon. She woke before dawn, made a pot of coffee, and sat by the window overlooking the narrow street. The world was still gray. Delivery trucks rumbled below. Steam rose from the manholes. Her stomach twisted. What could he possibly want? Gratitude, curiosity? Or was he offended that a maid had dared to speak his language? She almost considered calling in sick. But something inside her, the part that refused to be afraid, said go. By 9:30, she was back at the hotel. The lobby was already buzzing with guests. Marianne spotted her from the reception desk but said nothing. Lydia adjusted her uniform and took the elevator to the 21st floor. The numbers blinked upward. 10, 12, 15, 20, 21. When the doors slid open, the hallway was silent, carpet thick beneath her shoes. Suite 21-1 stood at the far end, door half ajar. She took a slow breath and knocked. A voice inside answered, low and firm. Come in. She stepped into the room. Khalid al-Rahman stood by the window, looking out at the skyline, the Empire State Building glowing faintly through the morning haze. He turned when she entered, and for a second, neither spoke. The silence between them stretched thin, filled only by the sound of the city beyond the glass. Then he said, almost softly, You surprised me last night. Miss Carter. She clasped her hands. I didn't mean to, sir. No, he said, turning fully toward her. That's what made it real. The words hung in the air, uncertain and heavy, as the first sunlight broke through the window and painted both of them in gold. And somewhere deep inside her, Lydia felt a familiar flutter, the quiet beginning of something she couldn't yet name. The room felt smaller, with Khalid standing there. Morning light painted the marble walls in soft gold, glinting off the glass table between them. Lydia waited quietly, unsure whether to speak or breathe. She'd spent her life serving people like him, powerful, unapproachable, impossible to read. But this time, there was something different in the air. Khalid gestured toward a chair. Please, he said. Sit. Lydia hesitated before obeying. Her back was straight, hands folded in her lap. She could feel her pulse in her fingertips. I wanted to thank you, Khalid began, his tone polite but searching. It's rare to hear my mother tongue spoken so perfectly in this country. You surprised everyone, especially me. I didn't mean to cause trouble, Lydia said softly. He waved a hand. You didn't. On the contrary, it was refreshing. He paused, as if studying her face. Where did you learn Arabic like that? She hesitated. Cairo. A long time ago. At the mention of the city, his expression flickered. Cairo, he repeated, almost to himself. I haven't heard anyone say it like that in years. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was heavy with unspoken memories. Lydia's eyes drifted toward the window. For a moment, she saw not the gray skyline of Manhattan, but the warm, sun-soaked streets of Egypt, the echo of a city that had shaped her heart. No, back then, she'd been young and fearless. Cairo had smelled of dust and spice, of roasted coffee and hot sand after rain. She lived in a small flat near Tahrir Square with 2 other students. They were all dreamers. One studied architecture, another poetry. Lydia studied languages, believing that if she could speak enough of them, she could bridge any distance between people. She remembered the mornings most vividly, the streets alive with honking cars, men selling oranges from wooden carts, the call to prayer weaving through the air like music. She would walk to class with her notebook pressed to her chest, her heart full of purpose. Her professor, Dr. Hamid al-Rahman, was a quiet man with kind eyes. He often said, "Language is the soul of understanding. Learn how people speak, and you will learn how they think." She didn't know then that he was Khalid's uncle. Dr. Hamid had believed in her. "You have an ear for rhythm," he once told her after class. "You don't just translate words, you translate meaning." Under his guidance, she learned not just Arabic grammar, but poetry, idioms, the small turns of phrase that made the language alive. He lent her books by Naguib Mahfouz and Mahmoud Darwish, scribbling notes in the margins. She loved those evenings in his study, the air filled with the smell of old paper and jasmine tea. It was the happiest time of her life, until that phone call. Her mother's heart had failed without warning. Lydia remembered the static in the line, the way her father's voice cracked when he said, "Come home, baby. We need you." She'd packed her life into one suitcase. The flight home felt endless. When she landed in New York, her scholarship was still valid for a month. She promised Dr. Hamid she would return after the funeral. She never did. Years later, she would sometimes dream of Cairo the color of the sky at sunset, the laughter of students echoing down stone hallways, Dr. Hamid's voice saying, "Don't lose your gift. Lydia, language is your bridge, now, sitting across from Khalid." Those words returned like a whisper from another life. "You studied there," Khalid said finally, breaking her reverie. "With my uncle?" Her head snapped up. "Your uncle Hamid al-Rahman. He taught at the university. He passed away 7 years ago." Her breath caught. "I didn't know. He was a good man." "Yes," Khalid said softly. "The best of us." He looked out the window again, voice lower. "I was a different man back then. My uncle used to tell me to value kindness over control. I didn't listen." Lydia said nothing. The moment was fragile, suspended between memory and regret. Khalid turned back to her. "Do you still speak Arabic often?" "Not anymore," she said. "Not since I came home. Life got busy. English took over." He nodded slowly. "That happens to all of us. We forget the languages that make us human." There was something genuine in his tone now, no trace of arrogance, just quiet reflection. Lydia felt a strange empathy rising in her chest. She wondered what he had lost in his own story. He poured 2 cups of tea from a silver pot on the table. "Please," he said, handing one to her. "In my country, it's rude to talk serious matters without tea." She accepted it with both hands. The porcelain was warm. For a few moments they drank in silence. Outside, the city buzzed faintly. Inside, time felt slower. Then Khalid asked, "Do you ever miss it?" "Cairo," she smiled faintly. "Every day." He studied her carefully. "Why didn't you go back?" Lydia stared into her tea. watching the steam curl upward, because sometimes life closes one door before you even realize it's gone. You just keep walking until the hallway ends, and by the time you look back, the door's disappeared. He nodded, as if he understood too well. Yes, life has a way of doing that. Something unspoken passed between them, an understanding built not on wealth or power, but on shared loss. After a while, Khalid set his cup down. "Would you help me with something?" Lydia looked up. "Help you?" He smiled faintly. "I'm speaking at a charity dinner tomorrow. They've asked me to say a few words in English and Arabic. My accent is heavy. You could help me refine it. In exchange, I'll make a donation to your hotel staff program." Lydia blinked, caught off guard. "You want me to coach you?" "Is that so strange?" he asked. "You're clearly qualified." She hesitated. "I'm not a teacher anymore." "You never stop being one," he said quietly. The words hit deeper than he knew. For a long moment, Lydia didn't answer. Then she said, "All right, I'll help." Khalid's expression softened, almost relieved. "Good. Let's meet here tomorrow. Same time." As Lydia stood to leave, he added, "Miss Carter." She turned at the door. "I'm glad you spoke last night," he said. "It reminded me that silence isn't always strength." She nodded once, unable to find words. Outside the suite, she exhaled slowly. The elevator ride down felt unreal, her heart both light and heavy. It had been years since someone spoke to her as an equal, not as a maid. Back in the staff corridor, Thomas spotted her returning. So what did he want? She smiled faintly. A language lesson? He blinked. "You're kidding." Lydia shook her head, still half dazed. "Tomorrow morning." Thomas grinned. "Well, I'll be damned again." As she walked away, Lydia found herself humming a melody she hadn't thought of in decades. A tune from Cairo, simple and sweet. For the first time in years, she didn't feel invisible. And somewhere deep inside, something long asleep began to stir, not hope exactly, but something close enough to make her believe again. The morning after her meeting with Khalid, the hotel buzzed with its usual rhythm. Silver carts rattled down the hallways. The scent of coffee drifted from the lobby cafe, and polished shoes clicked like metronomes across marble floors. To a guest, it looked effortless, a kingdom of service. But to Lydia, it was choreography, built on exhaustion. She moved through it like she always had, steady and invisible. Yet something inside her had shifted. The memory of the suite, the conversation over tea, Khalid's words, "You never stop being a teacher," echoed with quiet insistence. At the housekeeping station, Thomas was already at the counter, sipping from a paper cup. "Morning, Professor," he teased, grinning. She rolled her eyes but smiled. "Don't start," he chuckled. "I heard from the night staff. The big man's been asking questions. You made quite an impression. I'm sure he'll forget soon enough," she said, tying her apron. Thomas leaned closer. "You know, Lydia, some people spend their whole lives waiting to be noticed. You didn't even try, and you still ended up in his orbit." Lydia gave him a look. "I'm not in anyone's orbit, Thomas. I'm just trying to finish my shift." He laughed softly and let her go. She spent the next few hours moving between suites, fluffing pillows, straightening curtains, restoring order to chaos left by guests who rarely saw the people who cleaned up after them. Some were kind, most indifferent. But there was always one moment each morning when Lydia paused by the window of an empty room. She'd look out at the skyline, the Hudson glittering in the distance, and whisper to herself, "You're still here?" Today, though? Something pulled her thoughts back to Cairo. She remembered how mornings there smelled of mint tea and diesel, how the air vibrated with voices. New York was different, louder, colder, lonelier. Around noon, she was assigned to the executive floor, the top level where only the wealthiest guests stayed. Marianne met her at the elevator, clipboard in hand. Mr. Al-Rahman requested that you handle his suite personally, Marianne said. Her tone was neutral, but her eyes betrayed curiosity. He seems to value your attention to detail. Lydia swallowed. Yes, ma'am. Marianne hesitated. Lydia, you're one of my best. Just be careful. People like him don't usually see us the way we see them. The warning sat heavy between them. Lydia nodded. I understand. When she entered the suite, sunlight poured across the floor like warm honey. Khalid was on the phone, pacing by the window, speaking in rapid Arabic. His voice carried that same confident edge. But now that she understood the words, she could hear the weariness behind them, the fatigue of someone always performing. He turned when he noticed her. Ah, Miss Carter. Right on time. I'm here to prepare the room, she said, setting down her supplies. He covered the phone and smiled slightly. Give me 5 minutes, then we'll begin. Of course. As she worked, she caught fragments of his conversation discussions about charity funds, international partners, schedules. Yet beneath it, his tone softened when he spoke of his uncle's foundation in Cairo. It reminded her of the student she'd once been, writing essays about bridging cultures. When he hung up, Khalid exhaled and rubbed his temples. Business, he muttered, as though it were a curse. It never ends. She smiled faintly. Neither does cleaning, sir. That earned her a short laugh. Touché. They began their lesson in the sitting area, the skyline stretching endlessly behind them. Lydia read a paragraph aloud in Arabic, then waited for him to repeat it. His pronunciation was stiff, at first clipped, formal. She corrected him gently, her tone patient but firm. Again, she said, this time, let the words breathe. Arabic is like music. It needs rhythm. He tried again, and she nodded. Better. By the third attempt, his accent softened. His voice filled the room with a sound that felt alive. When he finally got the phrasing right, she smiled, genuine and proud. You're a natural, she said. Khalid chuckled. You make it sound easy? It's not, she replied. But everything worth learning takes time. He looked at her, really looked at her as if seeing something beyond the uniform, beyond the label of Maid. You know, he said quietly, my uncle used to say the same thing. Her eyes met his. He was a wise man. For a moment, silence stretched between them again, not awkward, but charged with something unspoken. Respect, maybe, recognition. Then the knock came. Marianne entered with 2 hotel executives, both men in tailored suits. Their smiles were bright, their eyes calculating. Mr. Al-Rahman, Marianne said smoothly. We just wanted to check that everything is satisfactory. Khalid stood, polite but distant. Yes, everything is fine. One of the executives glanced at Lydia, his smile thinning. And the staff meeting your expectations? Khalid's gaze flickered toward her, then back to them. Exceeding them, he said. Miss Carter is assisting me with translation. She's quite capable. The men exchanged looks, surprised, maybe even uncomfortable. Marianne's posture stiffened. Lydia could feel the heat of their scrutiny, the quiet disbelief that someone like her could belong in this space. Translation 1 repeated, forcing a chuckle. That's unusual, Not really, Khalid said evenly. Competence is universal, isn't it? The comment landed like a stone. The men laughed awkwardly, muttered a few pleasantries, and left. Marianne followed them, but not before giving Lydia a fleeting glance, part pride, part warning. When the door closed, Khalid sighed. You'd think I'd insulted them. Lydia shook her head. People get uncomfortable when the world doesn't fit their boxes. He smiled faintly. I like that. For the rest of the hour, they continued their lesson, moving from pronunciation to conversation. He spoke of his travels, the languages he'd forgotten, the loneliness of being understood only through money. Lydia listened, offering corrections and small smiles. By the time they finished, the afternoon sun had dipped low. The room glowed in amber light. Khalid leaned back in his chair. You know, he said, when I first saw you reply in Arabic that night, I thought it was defiance. Now I see it was something else. What was it? She asked. Grace, he said simply. You reminded me what dignity looks like. Lydia looked away, feeling her throat tighten. I just answered a question, sir. He smiled softly. No, you reminded an entire room how small arrogance can be. She didn't know what to say. The compliment felt too heavy, too close, so she simply nodded and began to gather her things. Before she left, Khalid said, Miss Carter, would you join the dinner tonight? As my guest. Her hands froze on the tray. Your guest. He nodded. You've earned it. She hesitated. The idea felt absurd. A maid sitting among the wealthy. But in his eyes, there was no mockery, only sincerity. I'll think about it, she said quietly. As she left the suite, her heart pounded. She knew Marianne would never approve. The staff would whisper. The guests would stare. But part of her, the part that had once walked the streets of Cairo dreaming of diplomacy and language, longed to say yes. Down in the staff kitchen, Thomas saw her come in. You look like you've seen a ghost, he said. Something like that, Lydia murmured. What happened this time? She met his gaze, still half in disbelief. He invited me to dinner. Thomas blinked. The billionaire. You, Lydia nodded. I don't know what he's thinking. Thomas whistled. Maybe he's not. Maybe for once, someone's just doing what feels right. She smiled faintly, but her mind was already spinning. The lines between worlds were blurring, and she didn't know whether to be afraid or hopeful. That night, long after her shift ended, she sat by her window again, watching the city lights. Somewhere across the skyline, in a suite wrapped in glass and privilege, a man like Khalid al-Rahman had truly seen her. And for the first time, Lydia wondered what it would feel like not to be invisible. All day. Lydia felt the weight of the invitation pressing against her chest like a hidden secret. The hum of the hotel seemed louder than usual, the steady roll of luggage carts, the soft murmur of guests, the distant ring of telephones. Every sound reminded her that she didn't belong in the same world as Khalid al-Rahman, no matter what he had said. By noon, everyone in the staff wing had heard the rumor. Whispers followed her through the hallways like shadows. Did you hear the billionaire invited her? Maybe she did something for him. Or maybe he's just being polite. Lydia ignored the talk, but each word found its mark. In the service elevator, she caught her reflection in the metal door's tired eyes. Neat uniform, hair pinned tightly. There was nothing glamorous about her, just a woman who worked too hard and dreamed too quietly. When the doors opened, Marianne Lewis was waiting. Lydia, Marianne said, her tone cool but measured. Come with me. They walked to her office, small, neat, lined with photos of the hotel's awards and framed commendations. The blinds were half closed, slicing the sunlight into narrow stripes across the desk. Mary Ann gestured for Lydia to sit, but Lydia remained standing. "I hear Mr. Al-Rahman extended an invitation to you," Mary Ann began, folding her hands. "Yes," Lydia said carefully. "He asked me to attend the dinner tonight." Mary Ann studied her for a moment. "And what do you plan to do?" Lydia hesitated. "I haven't decided. I think you should decline." Mary Ann's tone was even professional, but her eyes were sharp. "It's not appropriate. Guests may misunderstand. Staff dining with clients, it breaks boundaries." Lydia's throat tightened. "I didn't ask to be invited." "I know that," Mary Ann said quickly, "and I don't doubt your integrity. But you've been here long enough to understand how this place works. Appearances matter." Lydia looked down at her hands. They were trembling slightly. "What if this isn't about appearances?" Mary Ann sighed, leaning back. "Lydia, you're one of the best employees I have. You keep this place running. Don't risk your reputation over something that doesn't belong to your world." The words stung, not because they were cruel, but because they carried truth. Still, Lydia couldn't shake the memory of Khalid's voice, the way he'd said, "You reminded me what dignity looks like." "I appreciate your concern," she said softly, "but it's just dinner." Mary Ann's lips pressed together. Sometimes dinner is never just dinner. When Lydia left the office, her chest ached with a mix of anger and uncertainty. She spent the next few hours cleaning rooms in silence, her thoughts spinning like dust in sunlight. Every swipe of her cloth across a counter felt like an argument she couldn't win. By evening, the city outside had begun to glow, lights flickering on one by one across the skyline. The hotel prepared for another banquet, another night of laughter that didn't belong to her. In the staff locker room, Thomas was tying his apron when he saw her walk in. "You look like someone fighting with herself," he said. She sat on the bench, exhaling. "Mary Ann told me not to go." "Are you going to listen?" Lydia looked at him helplessly. "I don't know. What would you do?" Thomas smiled. "Me, I'd go for the free food." She laughed despite herself. Then his voice softened. "Lydia, you've spent half your life making people comfortable while pretending you're invisible. Maybe it's time someone sees you, really sees you." His words settled in her chest like an ember. After her shift, she took the long way home, walking past Fifth Avenue. The night air was cool and sharp, the sidewalk slick from an earlier drizzle. Storefront windows glowed with luxury gowns, diamonds, watches that cost more than a year's rent. She paused in front of one boutique, staring at a simple black dress displayed behind the glass. It wasn't extravagant, but elegant, quiet, like her, inside. The saleswoman looked her up and down, hesitating before approaching. "May I help you?" Lydia's fingers brushed the fabric of the dress. "How much?" The woman quoted a number that made her stomach drop. Lydia almost turned to leave. Then she thought of Khalid's words again, and something inside her refused to shrink back. "I'll take it," she said. The woman blinked but nodded, ringing it up without comment. Lydia paid with her savings card, her heart pounding as the receipt printed. Walking home with the dress bag in hand, she felt lighter and terrified all at once. She hadn't bought something for herself in years. Not something that said "I matter." That night, in her small apartment, she laid the dress across her bed. The fabric shimmered faintly under the yellow lamplight. She sat beside it for a long time, thinking of her mother, how she used to say, "There's a difference between pride and dignity. Pride shouts. Dignity just stands tall." When the clock struck 7, Lydia dressed slowly. The mirror showed a version of her she'd almost forgotten. Graceful, composed. Not a maid, but a woman. She slipped on simple earrings and pulled her hair into a low bun. The subway ride back to the hotel felt surreal. Commuters barely glanced at her. But inside, her heart beat with a rhythm she hadn't felt in years. Not fear, but purpose. In the hotel lobby, Marianne saw her step out of the elevator. Her eyes widened slightly. "You're really going through with this?" she said. "Yes," Lydia replied, her voice calm. "It's just dinner." Marianne hesitated, then sighed. "For what it's worth, you look beautiful." "Thank you," Lydia said softly. The ballroom had been transformed again. Soft gold lighting, long tables dressed in white linen, crystal glasses sparkling under chandeliers. The air hummed with music and conversation. When Khalid saw her at the entrance, his expression shifted from surprise to something gentler. He stepped forward. "Miss Carter, Mr. Al-Rahman, you came," he said, smiling. "I was beginning to think you wouldn't. I almost didn't," she admitted. He offered his arm. "Then I'm glad you changed your mind." As they walked through the room, whispers followed. Guests turned discreetly, curious. Lydia felt the weight of 100 eyes but kept her head high. At the table, Khalid introduced her to a few of his associates. Some greeted her politely, others with the tight smiles of people trying to understand a situation that defied their assumptions. Lydia answered questions with quiet confidence, her voice steady. As dinner began, the conversation flowed easily. Khalid occasionally switched between English and Arabic, and Lydia followed with grace, translating when needed. Her laughter came naturally, now not loud, but real. Halfway through the meal, one of the guests, a senator's wife with too much perfume and too little tact, leaned toward her. "My dear, how did you meet Mr. Al-Rahman?" Lydia smiled politely. "At work." "Oh," the woman said. "What do you do?" "I clean rooms," Lydia said simply. The woman blinked, stunned into silence. A few guests nearby overheard, their conversation faltering. Khalid looked at Lydia, pride glinting in his eyes. "And she teaches," he added. "She's helping me with my Arabic. A remarkable teacher." The senator's wife smiled thinly, murmuring something about how diversity is so inspiring these days. Lydia just nodded, her composure unbroken. Later, as dessert was served, Khalid leaned closer. "You handled that beautifully." "I've dealt with worse," she said with a faint smile. He chuckled. "So have I." When the dinner ended, applause filled the room after Khalid's speech, one that Lydia had helped refine. His words carried sincerity that surprised even him, and as he thanked the staff publicly, eyes turned toward Lydia once again. This time, she didn't lower her gaze. Afterward, Khalid escorted her to the lobby. "Thank you for coming," he said. "You reminded me why I started all this." She smiled gently. "And you reminded me that dignity still matters." They stood there for a quiet moment before parting, two people from different worlds who had somehow met in the middle. As Lydia left the hotel that night, city lights shimmered against the pavement. The streets felt warmer, the air softer. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like a shadow walking home. She felt seen, and it terrified her. Because once someone has been seen, they can never truly disappear again. Morning light spilled through Lydia's window, soft but unforgiving. The world outside hummed with its usual rhythm delivery trucks, the murmur of early commuters, the echo of footsteps on wet pavement. Yet inside her apartment, time felt suspended. The black dress hung on the back of her chair like a secret. She hadn't had the heart to fold it away. Its fabric still carried the faintest trace of perfume and champagne from last night. For a moment, Lydia just stared at it, half convinced she had imagined everything: the dinner, the music, the eyes that followed her, Khalid's voice saying, "You reminded me what dignity looks like." Her phone buzzed on the nightstand. A message from Thomas. "You're on the news." Her breath caught. She sat up and opened the link. There it was, a picture from the dinner, taken by someone's phone. The headline read, "Mystery Woman at Billionaire's Table. Who is she?" The image showed her seated beside Khalid, smiling faintly as he spoke. The lighting was flattering, her posture graceful, but the comments below stung like thorns. Must be nice to clean tables and end up at one. His maid. Seriously, maybe he's feeling charitable. Lydia put the phone face down on the bed. Her heart thudded painfully. She hadn't asked for attention, she'd just accepted dinner. Now the world had turned it into a story she didn't recognize. She showered quickly, dressed in her uniform, and left for work. On the subway, a group of women nearby whispered over the same headline on a tablet. Lydia turned her face toward the window, pretending not to hear. When she arrived at the Crystal Avenue Hotel, the atmosphere was different. Conversations dipped as she passed. Some smiled politely, others couldn't quite hide their curiosity. At the staff entrance, Thomas was waiting with 2 coffees. He held one out. "You okay? I will be," she said. He sighed. "The story's everywhere. I tried telling people it's not what they think. But you know how gossip works." She took a sip of the coffee. "It's fine. Thomas, it'll pass." But she wasn't sure she believed that. Inside, Marianne was already waiting. Her face was pale with tension. "Lydia, come with me." They walked quickly through the staff corridors. Lydia could feel eyes on her, whispers following like smoke. In Marianne's office, the blinds were closed tight this time. The desk was scattered with papers and a printed article from the same website. "This," Marianne said, tapping the paper, "is a problem." "I didn't do anything wrong," Lydia said quietly. "I know that," Marianne said, lowering her voice. "But perception is powerful. The hotel's PR team is worried. Guests are asking questions. The board's not happy." Lydia's chest tightened. "Because I had dinner. Because you blurred a line," Marianne said, her tone firm but not unkind. "You know how fragile reputation is in this business. They think you're—" She hesitated, searching for the word. Too visible. Lydia's throat burned. "So I should have stayed invisible." Marianne exhaled. "Lydia, please, I'm on your side, but I have to manage fallout. I need to ask you to avoid contact with Mr. Al-Rahman until this settles." There it was, the quiet punishment beneath polite words. Lydia nodded slowly. Of course. When she left the office, she felt smaller than she had in years. She spent the rest of the morning in silence, folding linens in the laundry room. The hum of the machines was steady, almost soothing, but her mind wouldn't quiet. She replayed every moment from the dinner, wondering if she had smiled too much, spoken too freely, existed too visibly. Around noon, the door opened. Khalid stood there, dressed in a dark suit, his expression unreadable. Thomas, who was sorting uniforms, froze mid-motion. Lydia straightened instinctively. "Miss Carter," Khalid said evenly. May I have a moment? Lydia hesitated. Mr. Al-Rahman. I think Marianne appeared behind him, breathless. Mr. Al-Rahman. I was just explaining. He raised a hand. With respect. Ms. Lewis. I'd like to speak with her privately. Marianne hesitated, then nodded reluctantly and stepped aside. When they were alone, Khalid's tone softened. You saw the news, I assume? Yes, Lydia said. I'm sorry. I didn't mean for any of this. You have nothing to apologize for, he said. People talk because it's easier than thinking. She managed a faint smile. That doesn't make it easier to hear. He sighed. The world loves stories that fit their imagination. A billionaire and a maid it sells, but they don't see what I see. And what do you see, sir? She asked quietly. He looked at her for a long moment. Someone honest. Someone who speaks with truth, not fear. Lydia lowered her gaze. Truth doesn't pay the rent. He smiled sadly. No, but it feeds the soul. Before she could answer, Marianne returned, tension written across her face. Mr. Al-Rahman, please understand this isn't personal. The board insists on keeping boundaries clear. They've asked that we manage staff assignments accordingly. Khalid's expression hardened. Are you dismissing her? No, Marianne said quickly. Just reassigning her to the lower floors for now. Lydia swallowed hard. She wanted to speak, to defend herself, but pride held her still. Khalid turned to her. You deserve better than this. It's fine, she said softly. I've handled worse. Their eyes met his filled with frustration, hers with quiet endurance. Then he said something in Arabic, his voice low and deliberate. Dignity cannot be reassigned. Lydia blinked, the words striking deep. He gave her a small nod and left, the echo of his footsteps lingering long after the door closed. For the rest of the day, Lydia worked in silence. The lower floors were older, less glamorous rooms without views, carpets that had lost their sheen. But there was a strange comfort there. The guests were simpler, the air less pretentious. As she made beds and wiped down mirrors, she thought about Khalid's words. Dignity cannot be reassigned. Maybe he was right. Maybe what had happened wasn't shameful. Maybe it was just new, a truth too uncomfortable for others to accept. That night, she left work late. The street shimmered under a light drizzle. Near the subway entrance, she saw a newspaper stand. Her photo was there again, smaller this time, tucked in a corner beneath the headline, A Conversation Beyond Class. It quoted Khalid's public statement, The woman at my table is not a mystery. She is a reminder that wisdom wears many uniforms. Lydia's chest tightened. For a moment, she couldn't move. The words were simple, but they cut through the noise like light through fog. On the train ride home, she looked out the window, her reflection blurring against the city lights. For the first time, she felt something that wasn't shame or fear. It was clarity. By the time she reached her apartment, the drizzle had turned to rain. She stood by the window, watching droplets race down the glass, and whispered softly to herself in Arabic words of gratitude, quiet and sincere. For once, she wasn't speaking for anyone else, just herself. For several days, the hotel returned to its rhythm or tried to. The lobby flowers were changed twice a week. The same guests called for the same drinks, and the same songs played from the grand piano at dusk. But beneath the routine, something subtle had shifted. Lydia felt it every time she passed through the marble hallways. People no longer whispered quite as loudly, but the silence that replaced it carried its own judgment. She learned to move through it quietly again, the way she used to before everything changed. Yet now, Invisibility felt heavier. Once you've been seen, you can't unsee yourself. One afternoon, as she polished the brass rail along the staircase, she caught sight of Khalid in the lobby. He stood alone near the window, speaking softly into his phone. There was no entourage today, no reporters, no audience, just a man who looked tired of being watched. When their eyes met, he gave a small nod, a gesture that said, "I see you, but also I understand." She returned the nod. Nothing more. It was safer that way. Later that day, a message arrived for her at the service desk. A simple envelope with her name, written in neat handwriting. Inside was a card. "I've arranged an English-Arabic reading session at the library downstairs. No cameras, no audience, just words. K." She read the note twice before folding it carefully into her pocket. That evening, when her shift ended, she walked toward the library. It was quiet, a cozy space lined with dark wood and tall bookshelves. Khalid sat at a long table near the window, surrounded by books of poetry. He looked up when she entered. "I wasn't sure you'd come," he said. "I wasn't sure either," she replied, setting down her bag. He smiled. "Then it's good we both did." For a while, they read in silence. Khalid traced the Arabic script with his finger, repeating lines slowly, his accent still rough at the edges. Lydia listened, correcting him gently when he slipped. "Your vowels still fight you," she teased. He chuckled. "They rebel against my English tongue." She laughed softly. The sound startled her. Laughter had felt foreign lately. After a while, he closed the book. "You know, Miss Carter, I used to believe fluency was about control, mastering words, commanding meaning. But you speak as if words are alive." She thought about that. Maybe they are. You don't master them. You let them breathe. He nodded thoughtfully. "My uncle used to say something similar." She smiled. "He taught me that too." The memory of Dr. Hamid lingered between them, two students of the same teacher, meeting years later in a place neither expected. It created an intimacy that didn't need to be spoken. As they talked, the sky outside deepened to violet. Khalid poured tea from a small silver pot the hotel librarian had brought earlier. The scent of mint and cardamom filled the air. He said quietly, "I wanted to apologize for what happened. The attention, the gossip. I should have protected you better." "You didn't owe me that," Lydia said. "The world just saw what it wanted to see." Still, he insisted. It was unfair. She met his gaze. "Life isn't fair. Mr. Al-Rahman, you learn to find grace where you can." He smiled faintly. "You sound like my uncle again." "Maybe he's speaking through us," she said, half joking. Khalid looked out the window, the city lights flickering in his reflection. "He once told me that wealth is only impressive until you meet someone who carries peace instead. I never understood that until recently." Lydia's eyes softened. "Peace isn't something money buys. It's something you stop running from." They sat in companionable silence for a while. The sound of distant footsteps echoed from the hall, a reminder that the world still existed outside this quiet corner. Then Khalid said, "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you'd stayed in Cairo all the time?" She admitted. "Sometimes I think I'd be teaching at the university. Sometimes I think I'd still be broke. Just broke in another language." He laughed quietly, then said, "And yet, here you are, teaching again." She smiled, her heart tightening. Maybe life just finds its own classroom. The clock on the wall chimed softly. Lydia realized how late it had grown. She stood, smoothing her uniform. I should go. My train doesn't wait for poetry. Khalid rose too. Thank you for coming. As she turned to leave, he added, Lydia, the world talks too much about who people are supposed to be. I think it's time someone just listened. She hesitated, then said, Then maybe you're finally learning the language your uncle meant? Their eyes met for a moment, 2 worlds bridging again, and then she left. Outside. The lobby was dim and almost empty. The pianist was packing up. Lydia passed by unnoticed, her mind still warm with the echo of conversation. Something inside her had eased, like a knot slowly loosening. Over the next week, she and Khalid met several times, never publicly, never with attention. Sometimes in the library, sometimes in the garden behind the hotel where few guests went. They spoke of small things, books, cities, the way the morning light looked different in Cairo than New York. Slowly, laughter returned to her voice. One afternoon, she found him sitting by the fountain, staring at his phone with a grim expression. She hesitated before asking, Bad news. My board in Dubai, he said. They think I'm losing focus. They want me to step back from the foundation. I'm sorry, she said. He shook his head. Don't be. It's strange I've built empires, but I can't convince men in suits that compassion isn't weakness. Lydia sat beside him. Then show them its strength. He looked at her, surprised. How by doing what they can't, she said simply. By listening? He smiled faintly. You make it sound easy. It's not, she said, but it's possible. A breeze moved through the courtyard, carrying the scent of rain and tulips. For a moment, he looked lighter. Miss Carter, he said softly, I've spent my whole life surrounded by people who want something from me. But you just talk to me. She looked at him, unsure how to answer. Maybe that's all you ever needed. That night, as Lydia walked home, she thought about his words. She wasn't sure what was growing between them. Friendship, understanding, something unnamed, but it felt honest. It felt human. At her apartment, she sat by the window again. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets slick with reflections. She opened her worn notebook, the one she'd once used for Arabic poems in Cairo, and began to write. Not a translation this time. Her own words. Some bridges are built from silence. Some languages never need to be learned. Sometimes, 2 souls just remember each other from somewhere the world forgot. When she finished, she smiled softly to herself. Maybe this was what healing looked like, not loud or triumphant, but quiet and steady, like the sound of a foreign word remembered after years of forgetting. And somewhere high above the city, in a penthouse wrapped in glass. Khalid sat by his window too, staring at the skyline. He thought of the maid who spoke his language when no one else understood, and for the first time in years, he felt at home. The following week began with rain. Heavy, endless rain that blurred the city's skyline and turned the sidewalks into rivers. Lydia arrived early that morning, her umbrella folding against the wind as she entered the Crystal Avenue Hotel. The lobby gleamed as always, but the air carried tension, the kind that didn't belong to weather. Marianne was already waiting near the reception desk, arms crossed, face unreadable. "Lydia," she said quietly, "Mr. Al-Rahman asked for you again." Lydia blinked. "Now he's in the conference suite. But," Marianne hesitated, "I should warn you, the board members are here from Dubai. They're not happy." Lydia's stomach tightened. About what Marianne gave her a sympathetic look. About everything. The news, the photos, the attention. They think he's lost focus. Be careful in there. Lydia nodded and made her way upstairs. Her shoes made no sound against the carpeted hall. As she approached the door of the suite, voices leaked through sharp, low, and angry. When she knocked, the voices stopped. "Come in," Khalid said. "Inside." The atmosphere was heavy. 3 men in dark suits sat around the table. Papers spread before them. Khalid stood at the head, his posture calm, but his eyes weary. Lydia could feel the weight of their stares the moment she entered. "This is Miss Carter," Khalid said. "She'll translate for our guests later." One of the men, older and sharp-eyed, looked her over. "She's the one from the photographs, isn't she?" Khalid's tone cooled. "Yes, and she's also the only one here who can help you understand the proposal clearly." The man leaned back, unimpressed. "We don't need interpretation to know that this," he gestured vaguely toward her, "is bad for business." Lydia froze, but Khalid spoke before she could. "What's bad for business," he said evenly, "is mistaking humanity for weakness." The words landed like a blade. The men exchanged glances, murmuring in Arabic too fast for Lydia to catch every word. She understood enough embarrassment, distraction, impropriety. She felt heat rise to her cheeks but kept her expression neutral. She'd spent years perfecting the art of quiet endurance. Finally, one of them said, "You've changed. Khalid, you used to be decisive. Now you listen to maids." Khalid's voice dropped. "Maybe that's why I'm learning again." The silence that followed was electric. The men gathered their papers, muttering under their breath, and left. The door closed softly behind them, but the echo lingered. Khalid exhaled and pressed a hand to his temple. "They're vultures," he said. "They smell reputation like blood." Lydia hesitated. "You didn't have to defend me." "Yes, I did," he said quietly. "Because they weren't just attacking you. They were attacking everything decent left in this business." He looked out the window, rain streaking the glass like veins of silver. "They'll threaten to pull funding from the foundation. I might lose half my board." "I'm sorry," she said softly. "Don't be." His voice softened. "You reminded me that some things are worth losing." For a while, they said nothing. The sound of rain filled the silence. Then he turned to her. "Do you ever get tired of being the one who has to endure?" She met his gaze, tired but steady. "All the time. But endurance isn't defeat. It's survival." He nodded, thoughtful. "And survival takes more courage than any boardroom I've ever sat in." The words warmed her more than she wanted to admit. That afternoon, they worked together in quiet rhythm reviewing letters for the Foundation School program in Cairo. Lydia helped him rephrase translations, smoothing rough edges in his English responses. He listened closely, sometimes teasing, sometimes reflective. It felt almost peaceful until Marianne appeared at the door. "Mr. Al-Rahman," she said, polite but tense. "May I have a moment?" He gestured for her to enter. Marianne looked at Lydia, then back at him. "The PR team wants to know if you'll issue another statement. The press is asking questions again, about what he asked, already knowing. About her," Marianne said, glancing at Lydia. "They've found her address. They're calling the hotel." Lydia's chest tightened. "They what?" Marianne sighed. "I've been fielding calls all morning. They want interviews, human interest stories. Some of them are kind, others not so much." Khalid's jaw tightened. "I'll handle it." Marianne nodded, but lingered. "Lydia, you should go home for a few days, until this dies down." Lydia hesitated. "And if it doesn't, then we'll figure something out," Marianne said gently. Khalid turned to her. "Go home, Miss Carter. Please." You don't deserve this noise. But she shook her head. If I leave, they win. They'll make it look like shame. He looked at her, impressed. You're stronger than most men I know. She smiled faintly. I've had practice. That night, she did go home, but not to hide. Her apartment felt too small for the storm outside. She made tea and sat by the window, watching flashes of light cut through the clouds. For the first time, she allowed herself to cry, not from fear, but from exhaustion. She'd spent her whole life staying small so others could stay comfortable. And still, somehow, it was never enough. When her phone buzzed, she wiped her eyes. A message from an unknown number. Don't let them turn your grace into scandal. Kay, she smiled through her tears. The next morning, she woke to another surprise. Outside the hotel, reporters had gathered, cameras flashing, voices overlapping. Khalid arrived through a side entrance, surrounded by security, but his expression was calm, almost defiant. That evening, the hotel released a statement written by Khalid himself. In every society, we measure people by wealth, status, or title. But true worth is found in integrity in those who work with dignity when no one is watching. Lydia Carter reminded me that humanity is not a hierarchy. It's a shared language. By nightfall, the article had gone viral again. This time, the tone was different. People called it brave, unexpected, moving. Some mocked it still, but others began to listen. A few journalists even wrote op-eds about class, empathy, and the illusion of equality. Lydia watched the coverage quietly from her break room. Thomas stood beside her, grinning. Well, he said, looks like the man's got your back. She smiled, shaking her head. Maybe he just found his voice. Thomas chuckled. Or maybe you helped him find it. Later, Khalid stopped by the staff corridor. No entourage, no announcement, just him. He found her folding linens. Looks like we made the news again, he said softly. She turned, half smiling. You should be careful. I'm bad for your reputation. On the contrary, he said. You gave it meaning. She studied him for a moment. You risked a lot today. So did you. He replied. You just did it quietly. They stood there, the hum of the laundry machines filling the silence. Then Khalid said, I'm flying to Dubai next week to face the board. They'll probably demand my resignation. Lydia's heart clenched. And if they do, then I'll leave, he said simply. I have enough money to last 10 lifetimes, but I don't have enough peace for even one. She didn't know what to say. For once, words failed her. Before he left, he added, Whatever happens, thank you. You reminded me that sometimes the most powerful voice is the one that refuses to shout. When he was gone, Lydia stood in the empty corridor, the scent of fresh linen and steam all around her. For the first time in her life, she realized that maybe she didn't need to be invisible anymore. Maybe being seen, even when it hurt, was the beginning of freedom. The flight to Dubai stretched endlessly across the night. From his seat by the window, Khalid watched the Atlantic shimmer beneath moonlight, a silver desert of moving waves. The hum of the engines drowned the world into silence, yet his mind wouldn't rest. He thought of Lydia's voice. Endurance isn't defeat, it's survival. Those words had stayed with him, more stubborn than any business lesson he'd ever learned. He opened his briefcase and unfolded the board's agenda performance review, foundation restructuring, media strategy. Each line looked like a verdict waiting to be delivered. He closed the folder. For once, numbers felt irrelevant. By the time the plane landed, The desert dawn had turned the sky a pale rose. Dubai was waking cranes slicing through the mist, towers shimmering like heat itself. His driver met him at the gate, but Khalid waved off the limousine. "No convoy," he said quietly. "Just drive." The city flashed past streets lined with palm trees, billboards of perfection, the mirage of wealth that once made him proud. Now it only looked hollow. The board meeting began at noon. 12 men sat around the oval table, suits crisp, expressions colder than the air conditioning. "Khalid," said Omar Hassan, his oldest partner, "we respect you, but this scandal has damaged our credibility." Khalid raised an eyebrow. "Scandal? For speaking to a woman with dignity." "It's not the act," Omar said. "It's the perception. You've made yourself vulnerable. Investors see weakness. Then they're blind," Khalid said quietly, "because what they call weakness is exactly what made us strong." Another member leaned forward. "You've changed, Khalid. You used to chase growth. Now you talk about empathy, charity, listening. These things don't build empires." Khalid smiled faintly. "Maybe it's time we stop building empires." The room froze. A few exchanged alarmed looks. Omar's tone sharpened. "Be careful, my friend. You're risking decades of work. We can remove you if we must." Khalid stood, his shadow stretching across the polished floor. "Do what you must. I've built enough to know I don't need to keep building it." They stared at him, disbelief, fear, even pity flickering across their faces. "You're walking away?" Omar asked. "I'm walking toward something better," Khalid replied. He left before they could answer. Outside, the heat wrapped around him like truth, heavy, real, impossible to ignore. That evening, he visited a small cafe near the creek, one he hadn't seen since his youth. The same wooden tables, the same smell of cardamom coffee. He sat by the window, alone, watching the sun melt into gold over the water. He thought of his uncle again, Dr. Tamid, with his patient eyes and worn hands. "You can own the world, Khalid, but if the world owns your heart, you've lost." He whispered it aloud and smiled. Then his phone buzzed. A message? From Lydia. "I heard they held the meeting today. Whatever they said, remember peace is not weakness." He stared at the screen, then typed back, "You were right. Survival isn't defeat. Sometimes it's revelation. For the first time in months." He laughed quietly to himself. Over the next few days, he met with the foundation's directors, not as a tycoon giving orders, but as a man trying to mend something broken. He visited one of their schools outside the city, rows of children reading in Arabic and English, their voices rising in song. The principal, a young teacher from Cairo, greeted him warmly. "Your support built this place," she said. He shook his head. "No, people like you did." Among the students, he noticed a little girl struggling to pronounce a word. He knelt beside her. "May I help?" he asked in Arabic. She nodded shyly. Together, they sounded out each syllable until the word came clear. Her eyes lit up. It was a small moment, but it felt like a lifetime condensed. That night, alone in his apartment, overlooking the sea, Khalid recorded a voice note. His voice was calm, lower than usual, the tone of someone speaking not for approval, but for truth. "To the board, I resign as chairman of Al Rahman Holdings, effective immediately. The company will continue, but I no longer wish to measure worth in profit. I will dedicate my resources to the foundation and education. The future isn't in skyscrapers. It's in minds that learn to question." He sent the message, set the phone aside, and breathed deeply. For the first time, the silence didn't feel empty. It felt earned. He spent another week in Dubai, settling affairs, meeting old friends who didn't quite understand, but respected him anyway. When he finally boarded the plane back to New York, the air felt lighter. At JFK, the city greeted him with drizzle again, soft, familiar, alive. As he stepped into the hotel lobby the next morning, the staff turned their heads. Some whispered, others smiled cautiously. But Lydia wasn't at the front desk or the corridor. He found her in the laundry room, folding towels. She looked up, startled. "You're back." "I am," he said. "And I brought you something." From his coat pocket, he took out a small box. Inside lay a simple silver pen with Arabic calligraphy etched along its side. "What does it say?" she asked. He smiled. Al-samt laysa sukun. It means silence is not stillness. It's from a poem my uncle loved. She traced the letters with her fingers. "It's beautiful. It reminded me of you," he said. "How you speak even when you're quiet." Her eyes softened. "So, what happened in Dubai?" "I resigned," he said simply. She froze. "You did what?" He shrugged lightly. "They can have the company. I'd rather have peace." "Are you sure?" she asked. "I've never been more sure." She smiled slowly, a mix of pride and disbelief. "Most people spend their lives chasing what you just gave up." "And they'll keep chasing," he said. "But I think I've finally stopped running." They stood there for a moment, surrounded by the scent of clean linen and steam. For two people who had nothing in common on paper, they seemed to share an entire language without speaking it. Later that evening, they walked together through Central Park. The city was quiet under the autumn light, children laughing in the distance, leaves rustling like whispered memories. Khalid told her about the school, the children, the moment the girl learned to pronounce her word. Lydia listened, her heart warm. "That's what real wealth looks like," she said softly. He nodded. "And it's the first time I've actually felt rich." When they reached the bridge over the pond, he stopped. "You once told me endurance isn't defeat. I used to think you meant surviving pain, but now I think you meant something else." She turned to him. "What's that?" He smiled faintly. "Endurance is choosing what matters, even when the world tells you it doesn't." The light caught his face, and for a moment, Lydia saw not the billionaire, not the scandal, not the man from the headlines, just someone human, finally unburdened. As the sun slipped behind the skyline, neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. The silence between them said everything. Morning sunlight streamed through the tall windows of the Crystal Avenue Hotel, turning the marble floor into rivers of gold. Lydia pushed her cart quietly through the corridor, her movements measured, her mind strangely at peace. For the first time in weeks, there were no whispers following her, no eyes watching too long. The storm had passed. What remained was silence. But it wasn't the cold, lonely silence she once knew. This was something different, softer, fuller, the kind of silence that holds possibility. Thomas greeted her in the hallway with his usual grin. "Guess who just made the morning news again?" She sighed, amused. "Do I want to know?" He held up his phone. The headline read, "Billionaire quits empire. Starts global education foundation." Below it, a photograph of Khalid not in a boardroom, not on a yacht, but standing beside a group of school children, smiling. Lydia's breath caught. He really did it. Thomas nodded. Looks like he meant what he said. The world's calling it bold. Some calling it madness. Me, I think it's honest. "Honest," Lydia repeated softly. The word lingered. She returned to her rounds, the cart squeaking faintly on the tiles. Each room looked the same as it always had crisp sheets, folded towels, windows opening to the same skyline. But inside her, something had shifted. She couldn't unsee what she'd witnessed, a man giving up everything people chase, just to reclaim his peace. Late that afternoon, as she was finishing her shift, Marianne called her to the office. When Lydia entered, Khalid was there, dressed simply in a gray suit, no tie, no entourage. He smiled warmly when he saw her. "Miss Carter," he said. "I hope I'm not interrupting." "Not at all," she replied, her heart steady but curious. Marianne gestured for them to sit. "Mr. Al-Rahman has something he wants to discuss with you." Khalid leaned forward. "I've decided to open the UPQuoS branch of my foundation here in New York. Education, languages, cultural exchange. It's all connected. But I need someone who understands both worlds. Someone grounded, patient, real." Lydia blinked. "And you thought of me. I didn't just think of you," he said. "I built this idea because of you." Marianne's eyes widened slightly. Lydia turned away, overwhelmed. "I don't know what to say." "Say yes," Thomas said, appearing suddenly at the door, pretending to polish his glasses. "Because some of us want to say we knew you before you became famous." Lydia laughed, shaking her head. "You're all impossible." But when she looked back at Khalid, she saw no expectation, only sincerity. "I don't have the education for something like this," she said quietly. He shook his head. "You have something more valuable than that. You have empathy. You listen, and you know what dignity sounds like in any language." The room fell silent. Marianne smiled faintly. "He's right, you know. You'd be good at it." Lydia looked down at her hands, the same hands that had carried trays, scrubbed floors, folded sheets. Could they really belong in a place like that? "I'll think about it," she said softly. Khalid nodded. "Take your time. I'll be here a few more weeks." When he left, the scent of his cologne lingered cedar and spice, faint but grounding. Lydia stood by the window, looking out at the city below. The idea scared her, not because it was impossible, but because it was finally hers to choose. That night, she walked home slower than usual. The air was cool, the city alive with evening light. At a street corner, a young girl sold roses from a cardboard box. Lydia bought one and carried it with her all the way home. At her apartment, she placed the rose in a chipped glass and sat at her desk. The old Arabic notebook lay open, waiting. She began to write, her hand steady. Once, a man spoke a language no one understood, and a woman answered because silence felt heavier than fear. They met not in power, but in truth, and truth, when spoken softly, can change everything. She smiled to herself. Maybe she was ready. The next morning, she returned to work. But everything looked different. The air felt lighter, the colors sharper. Even the endless marble halls seemed to hum with quiet life. By noon, she found herself standing outside Khalid's suite. She hesitated only a moment before knocking. He opened the door himself. "Lydia." She met his eyes. "I've decided." He waited. "I'll do it," she said. "But only if we start where it matters, not in boardrooms, but in the neighborhoods where kids never get the chance to dream." A slow smile spread across his face. "Exactly what I hoped you'd say." He gestured for her to come in. On the table lay maps, papers, sketches, plans for learning centers across the city. He pointed to one marked in the Bronx. "Our pilot program," he said. "We'll call it the Bridge Project, a place where people can learn languages, share stories, connect across cultures, just like we did." Lydia traced the name with her finger, The bridge project. She repeated, I like that. Because you built the first bridge. He said. They spent the afternoon planning, translating ideas into action, dreams into logistics. Khalid listened more than he spoke, taking notes as Lydia described what she'd seen in her own community, the struggle, the resilience, the hunger to be understood. As they worked, the city outside glowed in late afternoon light. For once, neither of them felt like they were standing on opposite sides of the world. By sunset, their plan was real enough to touch. Khalid leaned back, exhaling deeply. Do you realize, Lydia, that a single conversation in Arabic changed both our lives? She smiled. I think it just reminded us who we were supposed to be. When she left that evening, she didn't take the staff elevator. She walked out through the main lobby, head high, no longer trying to blend into the wallpaper. The doorman smiled as he opened the door. Good night, Miss Carter. She nodded, smiling back. Good night. Outside, the city sparkled like a promise. In the weeks that followed, the bridge project began to take shape. First a rented classroom in the Bronx, then volunteers, then students. Lydia helped design the program's Heart Conversation circles, where immigrants, workers, and locals could share their languages and lives. Khalid visited often, though quietly. He didn't make speeches. He just listened to stories, laughter, accents intertwining like music. One afternoon, as they watched a group of children practicing Arabic greetings with elderly neighbors, Khalid turned to her and said, Do you hear that? She smiled. What? The sound of understanding, he said. For the first time, Lydia laughed without hesitation. It wasn't wealth, fame, or redemption that filled the room that day. It was something simpler: connection. A reminder that no matter where people came from, everyone just wanted to be heard. And as Khalid looked at her, the woman who had once silenced a room full of power, he realized she hadn't just answered his language that night. She'd answered a part of him he didn't know was still listening. The Bronx smelled of rain and fresh paint that morning. Outside the converted library building, a small crowd had gathered under fluttering banners that read, The Bridge Project, Learning Beyond Borders. Children clutched notebooks, reporters held cameras, and neighbors peered curiously from across the street. Lydia stood by the entrance, her palms damp despite the cool air. She wore a simple navy dress, nothing fancy, but it fit her like purpose. Her heart thudded, not from fear, but from disbelief. The building behind her used to be abandoned, its windows boarded, its walls tagged with graffiti. Now it was alive again, classrooms painted in warm colors, shelves lined with donated books, maps of the world pinned to every wall. Thomas arrived first, balancing a box of muffins. For the volunteers, he said with a wink, or for me, depending on how stressful this day gets. She laughed. You've been baking since 5. Haven't you, 4:30? He said proudly. History deserves fresh muffins. Marianne followed, her hair tied neatly, her usual sharpness softened by a smile. You did it. Lydia, look at this place. It's beautiful. Lydia exhaled slowly. We did it, she said. A black car pulled up to the curb. Khalid stepped out, dressed simply: white shirt, rolled sleeves, no tie. The crowd noticed, and a ripple of whispers spread. He smiled as he approached Lydia. You look nervous. I'm terrified, she admitted. Good, he said gently. That means it matters. Inside. The hum of anticipation filled the main hall. Reporters were already setting up. The local news station had sent a crew. This wasn't supposed to be about fame, but attention was inevitable. Lydia took a deep breath. "I don't want this to become another story about him," she whispered to Thomas. "It has to stay about the people." Thomas grinned. "Then you better make them listen." At 10 o'clock sharp, the event began. A journalist stepped up to the microphone, introducing Khalid first. Cameras flashed. He spoke briefly, calm, poised, his voice carrying the quiet authority of someone who no longer needed to prove anything. "Language," he said, "isn't just words, it's understanding. And understanding is the foundation of peace." This project began with one conversation, one that reminded me that dignity speaks louder than power. Then he stepped aside. "But the voice that truly built this place isn't mine. It's hers." He gestured toward Lydia. Applause filled the room. Lydia froze for a second, then walked slowly to the microphone. The lights were bright, but she forced herself to breathe. She looked out at the crowd faces of every color, parents holding children, elders with folded hands. Somewhere in the back, she saw a small group of hotel staff cheering quietly. "Good morning," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "When I was first asked to speak here today, I thought, what could a hotel maid possibly have to say about education or culture? But then I realized I've been learning my whole life. I just didn't know it." The room grew quiet. "I've learned that respect doesn't come from money. It comes from how you treat people who can't give you anything in return. I've learned that words can wound, but they can also heal. And I've learned that sometimes the people we overlook carry the wisdom we're searching for." She paused, her eyes glistening. "This project isn't about me, or Mr. Al-Rahman, or any headline. It's about connection. It's about the courage to speak and to listen, even when the world tells you your voice doesn't matter." When she finished, the room erupted in applause, not polite, not forced, but full. Cameras flashed again, but this time she didn't flinch. She smiled, calm and proud. Afterward, people came to shake her hand. Community leaders, teachers, mothers, even teenagers. A young boy tugged at her sleeve. "Miss Lydia," he said shyly, "can you teach me to say thank you in Arabic?" She knelt and smiled. "It's shukran. "Want to try shukran," he repeated carefully. "Perfect," she said. "Now you can thank the whole world." Khalid watched from a distance, his eyes warm. When the crowd finally thinned, he approached her. "You spoke beautifully," he said. She laughed softly. "I was shaking the whole time." "Then you shook the right things," he said with a smile. They stepped outside together, where the rain had turned into a light drizzle. Reporters still lingered, but most had moved on to other stories. The two of them stood quietly beneath the awning, watching people filter out. "You know," Khalid said, "when I left Dubai, they told me this idea would never work. Too idealistic, too naive. And what do you think now?" He looked at the children laughing near the doorway. "I think they were right, and I don't care." She smiled. "Naive doesn't mean wrong. It just means hopeful." They walked through the courtyard, where the fountain had been restored. The sound of water mingled with the chatter of new beginnings. Later that evening, after everyone had gone, Lydia lingered in one of the classrooms. The chalkboard still bore her handwriting. Words build bridges. She touched the corner of the board, tracing the faint chalk dust. "I never thought I'd end up here," she murmured. Khalid entered quietly. "Neither did I." She turned. "Do you ever miss it? The company, the power, the life you left?" He thought for a long moment. "Sometimes, but only the illusion of control, not the reality of it. And now I'm learning to live in truth." She smiled faintly. "You sound like your uncle." He chuckled. "Maybe I'm finally listening to him." They sat in silence for a while. The air smelled of new paint and rain. Then Lydia said, "You know, the first time I heard you speak Arabic, I thought you were testing the room. I was," he admitted, "but the test wasn't for them. It was for me." She raised an eyebrow. "And did you pass?" He smiled. "Not until you answered." Their laughter filled the empty room, soft, genuine, healing. When she left that night, she walked past the banner one last time, the bridge project. The letters gleamed faintly under the streetlight. She realized that for once, she didn't feel like she was walking away from something. She was walking toward it. The next morning, the papers carried her picture again, but this time, the headlines were different. From Maid to Mentor. The voice that built a bridge. Lydia didn't read all the articles. She didn't need to. The real story was already written in every child's laughter, every shared word, every connection forged between strangers who now spoke to one another. That night, Khalid stood by his window overlooking the city, watching the lights flicker. He picked up the silver pen on his desk, the one engraved with the words "Silence is not stillness," and smiled. For the first time in years, he felt that maybe his uncle was right. True legacy isn't what you build with power. It's what you leave behind in people who learn to believe again, and somewhere across town. Lydia sat at her kitchen table, journaling as she always did. But this time, her final line was simple. Some bridges are made of words. Others are made of grace. The strongest ones are both. By the time autumn turned to winter, the bridge project had become something much bigger than anyone expected. What started as a small community classroom in the Bronx now had waiting lists, donations, and volunteers from across the city. Schools requested partnerships, universities sent scholars to observe, and journalists came looking for the miracle story behind it all. At first, Lydia tried to ignore the attention. She kept her focus on the students, on the laughter, the progress, the way adults from different backgrounds learned to talk to one another without fear. But slowly, the cameras multiplied. News vans lined the block every other day, and donors wanted their logos on the banners. Something pure was beginning to feel commercial. One afternoon, she stood in the newly painted main hall, watching a group of volunteers set up a photo shoot. Bright lights, makeup kits, carefully arranged books. It all looked beautiful, but unreal. Khalid entered quietly, his expression thoughtful. "You don't look happy," he said. "I should be," she replied, forcing a smile. "Everyone says this is good for us." "Is it?" he asked softly. She sighed. "They want to film the kids reading today, but they keep asking them to repeat the same lines. It's not teaching anymore. It's performing." Khalid's eyes darkened with understanding. "Fame has a way of stealing sincerity." She looked at him. "You'd know." He smiled faintly. "Yes, that's why I left it behind." They stood in silence for a moment. The sound of laughter and camera shutters filled the background. Then Lydia said, "I don't want to lose what made this real." "Then we won't," he said. "We'll protect it." That evening, after everyone had gone, they stayed behind to clean up. The classroom was quiet again, chairs stacked, lights dimmed, the smell of chalk and old paper in the air. Khalid moved slowly between the desks, running his fingers over the surfaces as if memorizing them. "You built something they can't measure," he said quietly. "That's what frightens them." Lydia paused, looking at him. "You really think that's what this is?" He nodded. The world knows how to sell power. It doesn't know how to understand grace. She smiled at that. You always make it sound like poetry. Maybe truth is just poetry we forget to admire, he said. Over the next few weeks, the project's growth accelerated. The media dubbed Lydia the voice of humility and Khalid the billionaire with a conscience. More funding came in. So did offers from politicians, corporations, and even global NGOs. Everyone wanted a piece of the bridge project. But with growth came bureaucracy. Meetings multiplied, lawyers drafted contracts. Lydia, who once spent her days teaching English verbs and Arabic greetings, now found herself trapped behind spreadsheets and conference calls. One evening, as snow began to fall outside, she sat in her office, staring at the glowing laptop screen. Her reflection looked exhausted. The door opened quietly, and Marianne stepped in, holding 2 cups of coffee. "Still here?" Marianne asked gently. Lydia rubbed her temples. "I can't sleep. I keep thinking about next month's expansion." Marianne set down the coffee. "I used to think ambition was about climbing ladders. Now I think it's about not falling off the ones we build ourselves." Lydia smiled weakly. "You sound like Khalid," Marianne chuckled. "He's rubbing off on me. Speaking of him, he's worried about you." "I'm fine," Lydia said quickly. "Are you?" Marianne's tone softened. "You've been carrying this place on your shoulders. Lydia, you need to breathe." Lydia stared at the desk. "If I stop, it might all fall apart. Or maybe," Marianne said, "if you keep pushing alone, it will." Later that night, when everyone had gone home, Lydia wandered through the empty halls of the Learning Center. The silence felt heavier now, not the peaceful kind, but the kind that comes when something pure is stretched too thin. She walked into one of the classrooms. The chalkboard still bore a child's handwriting. "Peace begins with a word." She whispered it softly to herself. "Peace begins with a word." Then she heard a voice from the doorway. "But it has to start with truth." Khalid stood there, his coat draped over his arm. "You haven't gone home in 3 nights. I could say the same to you," she replied. He smiled faintly. "Touché." He stepped inside, hands in his pockets. "You're overworking." "I'm just keeping up," she said. "We asked for change, and it came faster than expected." He studied her face for a moment. "You're afraid of losing control." She looked at him sharply. "Wouldn't you be?" "Yes," he said. "That's why I'm here." They stood in the middle of the room, the sound of snow muffled against the windows. The tension between them wasn't romantic, not yet, not quite. It was something deeper, the unspoken bond of 2 people who carried the same wound, the same stubborn need to fix what the world had broken. Khalid said quietly, "You once told me peace can't be bought, but I think it can be lost if we forget why we started." Lydia's eyes softened. "You think I've forgotten?" "No," he said. "I think you're tired." The words broke something inside her. For a moment, she wanted to argue. Instead, she sank into a chair, pressing her palms together. "I just wanted to make something that mattered," she whispered, "something that would outlast us." Khalid knelt beside her. "You already have." She met his gaze. "Then why does it feel like the more we build, the less real it becomes?" He smiled sadly. "Because the world rewards spectacle, not sincerity. But you can't let their applause drown out your purpose." She looked away, blinking back tears. "Sometimes I wish we could go back to the beginning, the quiet moments, before all this. Maybe we can," he said softly. "Not by going back, but by remembering." "How?" she asked. He stood, offering his hand. Come with me tomorrow, somewhere away from the cameras. The next morning, they drove out of the city before dawn. The roads were slick with ice, the sky still pale gray. Khalid didn't tell her where they were going, only that it was a place his uncle used to love. After 2 hours, the skyline faded into rolling hills and open fields dusted with snow. When they finally stopped, Lydia stepped out of the car and stared. Before them stretched a quiet valley, an old farmhouse at its center, smoke rising from the chimney. "This is where Dr. Hamid wrote his letters," Khalid said softly. "He used to say the world's noise couldn't reach him here." They walked down the narrow path, boots crunching in the frost. The air smelled of pine and wood smoke. Inside, the house was warm and filled with bookshelves lined with old manuscripts, photographs, and journals. On the mantel sat a framed note written in Arabic. Lydia traced the words with her fingers, recognizing the phrase, "To teach is to serve, and to serve is to live twice." He believed that. Khalid said, "So do I, and so do you." Lydia smiled faintly. "It's beautiful. It's truth," he said, "and it's why I brought you here. To remind us what we're building isn't a brand or a headline. It's a bridge fragile, human, and alive." She looked out the window at the valley below. The sunlight broke through the clouds, golden and quiet. For the first time in months, she felt still. "Khalid," she said softly, "maybe we should slow down." He nodded. "Then we will. Outside." The snow continued to fall, covering the world in silence, not the kind that hides, but the kind that heals. And somewhere deep inside, Lydia realized something simple but profound: success didn't have to be loud. It just had to be true. When Lydia and Khalid returned to the city, the first snow had melted into slush. The air carried that sharp, gray chill of late winter, a season between endings and beginnings. For a while, everything seemed calm again. The noise had faded. The cameras had gone. The bridge project moved at a quieter rhythm, just as they'd hoped. But peace, Lydia knew, was fragile. It began with small things: a missing receipt here, a miscommunication there. Then came the emails. One afternoon, while reviewing the foundation's finances, Lydia noticed several new donors listed under a corporate name she didn't recognize. Zenith Global Partnerships. The report read. The numbers were large, too large. She frowned. "We didn't approve this." Thomas found her that evening in her office, eyes narrowed at the spreadsheet. "What's wrong?" he asked, handing her a coffee. She pointed to the entry. "Do you know anything about this?" He leaned over, squinting. "Zenith Global. Sounds familiar. I think they were at the last donor dinner." "I wasn't at that dinner," Lydia said slowly. "Who handled it?" "Elaine," he said after a pause. "Elaine Matthews, the newly hired program director. She'd come highly recommended, polished, confident, fluent in grant language and corporate etiquette. Lydia had liked her at first. She seemed efficient, organized, capable, maybe too capable. Lydia closed the laptop gently. "Thomas, can you call Mary Ann? Tell her to meet me first thing tomorrow." The next morning, Mary Ann arrived looking uneasy. "You saw the Zenith funds, too, didn't you?" she said before Lydia could speak. "Yes," Lydia replied. "What's going on?" Mary Ann hesitated. "I've been trying to get answers. Elaine submitted a proposal apparently under your name for a corporate partnership initiative. It's supposed to expand the bridge project nationwide." Without my approval, Lydia's voice hardened. "She claims she had verbal permission from Khalid." Lydia froze. "That's not possible. We agreed to slow down." "I know," Mary Ann said quietly. "But she's clever. She's convinced half the board this is progress. That evening, Lydia went straight to Khalid's office. He looked up from his desk, surprised. "Lydia," he said warmly, "you're just in time. I was about to call you. We've had a massive funding offer from Zenith Global." She finished for him. He blinked. "Yes. How did you?" "She went around us," Lydia interrupted. "Elaine used your name and mine. She's selling what we built." Khalid's expression shifted surprise, then disappointment. "I trusted her." "So did I," Lydia said, "but this isn't about trust anymore. It's about integrity." He stood and walked to the window, hands clasped behind his back. "You think we should refuse it. I think if we say yes, the bridge project becomes theirs, not ours," she said firmly. "It'll turn into a brand, not a place of hope." He turned back to her, eyes steady. "And if rejecting it means losing everything," she hesitated, "then we start again, because at least it will still be ours." There was a long silence. Outside, the city lights glowed like distant fires. Then Khalid nodded. "You're right." The next day, they called an emergency board meeting. Elaine arrived poised, confident, papers in hand. She smiled like someone certain she'd already won. "Before we begin," she said smoothly, "I want to remind everyone that progress requires partnership. We have a chance to expand globally, to change millions of lives." Lydia looked her directly in the eye. "At what cost?" Elaine blinked, feigning innocence. "Cost. This is an investment in our future." Khalid leaned forward, voice calm but sharp. "Did you submit proposals under our names without consent?" Elaine hesitated. "It was a misunderstanding. The opportunity came suddenly. I didn't want to miss it." "Miss it," Lydia said coldly. "That's exactly what you should have done." The room fell silent. Elaine tried to recover. "We can't afford to be small forever. People are watching. Growth means legitimacy." "Growth without honesty is rot," Khalid said quietly. "And I won't lead anything built on deception." Marianne handed out copies of the unauthorized proposal. The language was polished but hollow, all buzzwords, no soul. There were even clauses giving Zenith partial control over the bridge project's branding and curriculum. When Khalid read the line, "Empowerment through profit-sharing education," his jaw tightened. "This," he said softly, "is exactly what we were trying to escape." Elaine's smile faltered. "You're being idealistic." Lydia's voice trembled, not with fear, but conviction. "Idealism built this place. Not marketing, not greed. Just people who believed they mattered." For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Khalid said, "The decision is final. We're cutting ties with Zenith." Elaine's composure cracked. "You'll regret this. You think you can survive on poetry and goodwill. You'll lose funding, credibility, everything." Khalid stood. "Then we'll lose it together." Lydia met Elaine's gaze. "We've already survived worse." Elaine left without another word. When the door closed, the room exhaled. Marianne rubbed her forehead. "Well," she murmured, "that'll make tomorrow's headlines interesting." Khalid turned to Lydia. "You should have been the one running this all along." "I'm not a leader," she said softly. "You just proved you are," he replied. Over the following week, fallout spread fast. Zenith withdrew millions in promised funding. Reporters called it the project that chose pride over progress. Some donors left. Others stayed quietly, loyally. The center in the Bronx tightened its budget but refused to close. Despite everything, attendance didn't drop. If anything, more people came. They brought food, supplies, and stories. A local teacher donated her Saturdays. A retired carpenter built new shelves. Strangers showed up just to help. One night, as Lydia walked through the nearly empty hall, she saw a note pinned to the corkboard. It was written in uneven handwriting. "Thank you for teaching me words that make me feel seen. Alia, age 9. Her throat tightened. She folded the note carefully and tucked it into her pocket. Later, Khalid found her outside, sitting on the steps. The cold air bit at their breath, but the quiet between them was warm. "You were right," he said. "Losing them was a gift." She smiled faintly. "It doesn't feel like a gift yet." "It will," he said. "When something pure survives the fire, it comes out stronger." She looked up at the stars, faint and few against the city haze. "Sometimes I wonder if the world will ever understand what we're trying to do." "Maybe it doesn't have to," he said. "Maybe it just has to feel it." They sat in silence for a long time, two people who had lost much, but found something unbreakable in return. When Lydia finally stood, she looked back at the glowing windows of the bridge project. "You know," she said softly, "bridges don't fall because of storms. They fall when no one maintains them." He nodded. "Then we'll keep building." And beneath the soft hum of the city, that promise quiet, steady, unshaken became their foundation. Winter settled hard over New York that year. The streets turned silver under frost, and every breath hung in the air like smoke. Inside the bridge project, the heaters rattled and hummed, and the walls seemed to hold more warmth than the weather outside could ever offer. The betrayal with Zenith Global was now months behind them, but its echo lingered. Donations had slowed, media attention had shifted elsewhere, and the fancy cars that used to line the block during press events no longer came. Yet, the rooms stayed full. Every morning, children arrived with backpacks too big for their shoulders. Adults came on their lunch breaks, and retired neighbors volunteered to teach or translate. The heart of the project, Lydia realized, had survived. It'd just be quieter, now steadier, stronger. She walked down the hallway carrying a box of donated books. Thomas followed behind her, juggling a stack of dictionaries. "Careful," he said, grinning. "Those things weigh more than my rent." "You could stand to read one," she teased. He laughed. "If I wanted judgment, I'd talk to Mary Ann." As they turned the corner, they passed one of the new classrooms. A small group of children were reading aloud, voices blending in a mixture of accents and laughter. One little boy raised his hand proudly. "Miss Lydia taught me to say dream in Arabic," he shouted. Lydia smiled. "And what does it mean, Home?" the boy said, grinning. She clapped her hands softly. "That's right." Thomas leaned close. "You know, they'd follow you anywhere." She smiled at him. "That's exactly why I have to stay grounded." But even as she spoke, exhaustion tugged at her. She hadn't taken a real day off in months. She worked long after everyone left, going over budgets, planning lessons, trying to fill the holes Zenith's withdrawal had left behind. She told herself it was fine, that purpose was its own rest. Then one evening, she found Khalid sitting alone in the quiet of the main office. The lights were off, except for the faint glow from his laptop. "You should be home," she said gently. He looked up with a tired smile. "So should you." "I live here now," she joked, but her tone carried truth. He closed the laptop and rubbed his temples. The gesture was slow, deliberate, as if every movement took more effort than before. "Are you all right?" she asked. He hesitated before answering. "Doctors say I've been working too much. Nothing serious." Lydia frowned. What kind of nothing serious makes you sit in the dark? He chuckled softly. The kind that comes with being 55 and stubborn. She crossed her arms. Khalid. He sighed. My heart's been irregular. Stress. They say I'm on medication. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then she walked over and sat beside him. You can't keep giving everything away. Khalid, not even the strongest bridge holds if it never rests. I don't know how to stop, he admitted quietly. When I slow down, I remember what I've lost. She looked at him, her eyes soft but firm. Then maybe slowing down isn't losing. Maybe it's healing. He smiled faintly, the corners of his eyes crinkling. You sound like my uncle. You should have listened to him sooner, she said, smiling back. From that day on, she noticed small changes. Khalid moved slower, sometimes pausing mid-conversation as if catching his breath. He began to skip events, letting Lydia handle the public side of the project. The first few times she protested. He waved her off with a gentle smile. You speak with more truth than I ever could, he told her. And so, she did. She took the stage at community gatherings, spoke to donors, even visited city council meetings to advocate for more learning centers. Her speeches weren't rehearsed or polished, but they carried the weight of lived experience. People listened because she didn't sound like a leader. She sounded like one of them. One evening after a long day of teaching, Marianne approached her. You've become the face of this place, Lydia. I don't want to be the face, Lydia said. I just want to keep it alive. Marianne smiled. That's exactly why you're the right one. Meanwhile, Khalid spent more time at the Hudson River overlook, the quiet spot he once described to her as his thinking place. Lydia joined him whenever she could. They would sit on a wooden bench overlooking the water, wrapped in scarves, drinking coffee from paper cups. The air smelled of salt and cold iron. One afternoon, he said softly, do you ever think about Cairo? She looked at him, surprised. Every day, the streets, the light, the sound of the call to prayer echoing off the walls. It's strange it still feels like home, even though I only lived there for a year. I think that's what language does, he said. It gives us more homes than we expect. She nodded, and more people to miss. They sat quietly for a while, watching the river shimmer under the setting sun. Later that week, Khalid didn't come to the center. Then another day passed, and another. Finally, Lydia went to his apartment. His assistant let her in with a worried look. Khalid was in bed, pale but smiling when he saw her. I didn't want you to see me like this. Then you shouldn't have made yourself impossible to ignore, she said gently. Sitting by his side, he chuckled weakly. You never listen. She reached for his hand. You taught me not to. His eyes softened. Promise me something, he said. Whatever happens, you keep this going. Don't let it become just another story people forget. Lydia swallowed hard. Don't talk like that. I'm serious, he said quietly. If the bridge project is to mean anything, it has to live beyond us. It will, she whispered, but I need you to see it. He smiled faintly. Then I'll try. Over the next few weeks, Khalid's health declined. The doctor said it was heart failure, worsened by stress. Lydia visited every day, sometimes reading to him from the journal they'd started together, notes about languages, stories from their students, letters from children. One day, as she read aloud, he stopped her with a gentle hand. Lydia, he said softly, do you know what you gave me? She looked at him, puzzled. I didn't give you anything. You gave me back my humanity. He said, before you, I only knew how to build empires. You taught me how to build meaning. Tears blurred her vision. Then you gave it right back. He smiled weakly. Good. That means we're even. That night, as she left the hospital, the city was quiet under falling snow. She looked up at the sky, letting the flakes melt on her skin. Somewhere inside, she felt both pain and peace, the way life always holds both at once. The next morning, when she arrived at the bridge project, Thomas was waiting for her by the door. His face said everything before he spoke. He passed, she whispered. He nodded slowly. She closed her eyes, her heart heavy but steady. Then we'll keep building, she said quietly. And she did. Days later, at the memorial held in the main hall, the room was full: students, teachers, neighbors, strangers. Lydia stood at the front, her voice calm, clear, and full of quiet power. Khalid al-Rahman once said that words can build bridges. She began. He spent his life proving that. And now it's our turn. The crowd listened in silence. He believed in dignity, in compassion, in listening across every barrier. He believed that even the smallest voice can change the loudest room. So today, we don't say goodbye. We say thank you in every language he helped us understand. When she finished, no one clapped. They just stood heads bowed, hearts heavy, and somewhere in that stillness, Lydia felt it again, the heartbeat of the bridge project, steady and alive. The world outside would keep spinning fast, loud, careless, but inside those walls, they would keep teaching, keep listening, keep connecting, because legacy wasn't what Khalid left behind. It was what he'd awakened in them all. The city felt different without him. It wasn't something Lydia could explain, just a stillness in the air, a pause in the rhythm of things. The mornings at the bridge project started the same. The smell of coffee, the sound of chairs sliding, the hum of voices in a dozen languages. But beneath it all, there was a quiet ache. Khalid's name was now etched on a small bronze plaque outside the main door, in honor of Khalid al-Rahman, who built bridges not with wealth, but with words. People stopped to touch it when they came in. Some bowed their heads. Others simply smiled. Lydia came early every morning. She'd unlock the doors, walk through the empty classrooms, and whisper to herself, "We're still here." It became her ritual small promise to him and to herself. One morning, as she was setting up a lesson, a young volunteer entered carrying a large package. "This came for you," he said. The box was heavy, postmarked from Dubai. Lydia's heart skipped. The handwriting on the label was unmistakable, elegant, precise. Khalid's. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside was a wooden box, carved with Arabic calligraphy. When she lifted the lid, she found a leather-bound journal and a sealed letter. She sat down, the room quiet except for her heartbeat. The letter was brief, written in Khalid's steady script. "Lydia, if you're reading this, I've already gone where even languages fall silent. But I couldn't leave without one last conversation. Inside this box is a record: stories, ideas, unfinished plans. I want you to carry them forward. Build the bridges we only dreamed of, not with grandeur, but with grace. And remember what you once told me. Peace begins with a word. You were right. Shukran, my friend, Khalid." Tears blurred her vision. She closed the letter and held it against her chest. The journal was filled with sketches and notes designs for new learning centers, quotations from his uncle, and detailed plans for an international expansion of the bridge project. On the last page, he had written in Arabic, Every voice deserves an echo. That night, Lydia couldn't sleep. She sat by her window, the city lights reflecting on the glass. She thought of Cairo, of the first time she had heard Khalid speak in Arabic at that glittering hotel years ago, the night everything had changed. She whispered softly into the quiet room, "You're still here?" The next morning, she called Marianne and Thomas to her office. "We're expanding," she said simply. Thomas blinked. "Expanding. After everything, yes," she said. Khalid left plans, detailed ones. Centers in Morocco, Brazil, Kenya, and the Philippines. He wanted the bridge project to become global. Marianne looked at her carefully. "You're sure you're ready for this?" Lydia nodded. "No one ever really is, but he believed we could, and so do I." They began working day and night. Letters went out to educators, embassies, and volunteers across the world. Slowly, responses started to trickle in people inspired by the story, offering space, time, or funding. Months later, the first international center opened in Casablanca. Housed in an old library overlooking the sea, Lydia traveled there for the ceremony. As she walked through the courtyard filled with students and teachers from different continents, she felt the same warmth she had once felt in that Bronx classroom. A young boy approached her shyly. "Are you Miss Lydia?" She smiled. "Yes." He handed her a small piece of paper. On it was a single Arabic word, written carefully in a child's hand. "Amal Hope," she whispered, her throat tightening. The boy nodded proudly. "My mother taught me. She learned it here." Lydia looked around. The walls were decorated with drawings, bridges, stars, hands holding books. It wasn't fancy or rich, but it was alive. Later that evening, she stood by the sea. The wind carried the scent of salt and jasmine. She opened her phone and played an old voice message, Khalid's voice, faint but steady. "If you ever doubt yourself, remember this silence can be power too. It's not emptiness. It's space for meaning." She smiled through tears. "I hear you," she whispered. Back in New York, the bridge project thrived. The classroom stayed full, and new centers began to open in other cities. Volunteers sent pictures from around the world, children learning together, adults teaching each other to write their names in new languages, communities sharing meals after lessons. But Lydia never let the work turn into spectacle. She refused interviews, turned down corporate partnerships, and insisted that every center remain community-led. When journalists asked how she managed to keep it all alive, she would simply smile and say, "Because people want to understand one another. You just have to give them the space to start." Still, there were nights when she missed Khalid deeply, the quiet talks, his patient humor, the way he'd see meaning in everything. One evening, after a long day, she sat by the Hudson River overlook again. The same wooden bench, the same sound of water against stone. She whispered, "You were right. You know, words really can build bridges." As if in answer, her phone buzzed. It was an email from the Casablanca Center. Attached was a video of the students singing in Arabic, English, and Swahili. Their voices rose together, imperfect but beautiful. Lydia laughed softly through her tears. "You'd have loved this," she murmured. The following spring, she organized the first Bridge Global Summit in New York, not in a fancy hotel, but in a renovated school gym. Representatives from every center flew in. The air buzzed with accents, colors, and stories. As Lydia walked onto the stage, the crowd rose to its feet. She waited until the applause faded, then spoke gently. "When Khalid and I started this journey, we didn't plan to change the world. We just wanted to understand it a little better. We wanted people to see each other beyond language, beyond background. She paused, her voice steady but soft. Today, we are not just one project. We are thousands of bridges across cities, across hearts. And if you listen closely, you can hear them connecting. The room fell silent, the kind of silence that holds light instead of emptiness. At the end of the event, as everyone began to leave, a young woman approached her. "Miss Lydia," she said in a trembling voice. "My father was one of college students years ago in Dubai. He told me about you, about the night you spoke in Arabic when no one else did." Lydia smiled gently. He remembered that he said it changed how he saw people. The woman replied, "He said it reminded him that humanity speaks before any language." Tears filled Lydia's eyes. She reached out and hugged the young woman. "That's the best thing anyone could have told me." That night, when the lights were out and the gym was empty, Lydia stood alone on the stage. The air still carried echoes of laughter and applause. She closed her eyes and whispered, "We did it. Khalid, the bridge is still standing." Outside, the city glowed like a living map, streets weaving like veins, lights flickering like heartbeat pulses, and somewhere, in the quiet between those lights, Lydia felt it again, the presence she couldn't see, but always sensed. Khalid was gone, but his language, the language of kindness, dignity, and connection lived on. And in that moment, she understood legacies don't end. They translate. Spring slipped gently into summer, and with it came a new kind of peace. The bridge project no longer felt like a fragile dream. It was real alive in a dozen countries, rooted in the laughter and resilience of people who once thought their voices didn't matter. Lydia should have felt complete. Yet, somewhere inside, there lingered a silence she couldn't quite name. Every day brought new letters from around the world. Teachers from Nairobi wrote to say their students were now pen pals with children in Queens. Volunteers from Brazil sent photos of murals painted with words in 3 languages: Esperança, hope, Amal. But at night, when the classrooms emptied and the lights dimmed, Lydia often found herself standing alone by Khalid's plaque. She would trace the engraved letters with her fingertips and whisper, "You'd be proud, wouldn't you?" Sometimes. She imagined his answer in that calm, amused tone he used when he caught her doubting herself. "You already know I am." Still, she missed his presence, the quiet assurance, the thoughtful silences that used to fill the space between their words. One humid evening in late June, Marianne entered Lydia's office carrying a sealed envelope. "This just arrived from Khalid's estate," she said. It was labeled to be delivered exactly 1 year after his passing. Lydia's heart skipped. A year, Marianne nodded. "Looks like he planned this." Lydia took the envelope carefully. It was thick, the paper heavy and cream-colored, the handwriting unmistakably his. She hesitated before opening it, her fingers trembling. Inside were 2 items, a short letter and a folded legal document stamped with his foundation's seal. The letter began simply, "Lydia, if time has done its work, the pain will have softened, though I know you'll still argue with me about resting. I trust you've built more than I ever imagined. And now, I have one last request. There is a property in Cairo, an old house near the Nile, left to me by my uncle. I've never used it, but I've left it in your name. Inside, you'll find what he once called the Room of Beginnings. It belongs to you now. Use it for whatever the world needs next." Khalid Lydia read the letter twice, her throat tightening. "He left me a house." Marianne smiled softly. Not just a house. Lydia. Maybe a story. 2 months later, Lydia boarded a flight to Cairo. It had been more than 20 years since she'd last seen the city, the place where her love for languages had first taken root, long before life had steered her elsewhere. When the plane descended, the sight of the Nile glittering under the morning sun brought tears to her eyes. The air outside the airport was thick with heat, spices, and memory. She felt like she'd stepped into a part of herself she'd forgotten. The address led her to a narrow street lined with jacaranda trees, their purple blossoms drifting like confetti. The house stood quietly behind an iron gate, old but dignified. Its white walls cracked, its wooden shutters faded by time. Inside, it smelled of cedar and dust. Sunlight streamed through stained glass, painting the marble floor in soft colors. On the second floor, she found a locked door, the one marked the Room of Beginnings. Her hand shook as she turned the key. The door creaked open to reveal a study filled with books, manuscripts, and letters in both English and Arabic. On the desk sat a worn leather notebook, and beside it, a photograph Khalid standing next to his uncle, both of them smiling under a fig tree. Lydia opened the notebook. Inside were handwritten passages, fragments of thought, quotes, unfinished paragraphs. One page, written in Khalid's hand, stopped her cold. One day, she will come here, and when she does, she will understand that this was never my dream alone. It was always hers, waiting to be remembered. Her breath caught. She sank into the chair, the room spinning with emotion. For hours, she read his reflections, his regrets, his hopes for the world. There were letters addressed to future students, sketches of schools built by the Nile, notes about merging cultures through shared stories, and tucked inside the final page was a folded sheet of parchment, a translation, written neatly in his handwriting. Language is light. It doesn't divide us. It reveals us. By the time she finished reading, evening light poured through the window, dust floating like tiny stars. She closed the book gently and whispered, "You always knew how to speak through silence." The next day, she visited the local authorities to finalize the property transfer. But when she mentioned her plans to restore the house, the official smiled. "Oh, Miss Carter, it's already in use." What she asked, confused. He nodded. "A few months after Mr. Al-Rahman's death, we received notice to convert part of it into a free language school. It's been running ever since." Lydia blinked. "Who runs it? Local teachers? Volunteers?" He left funding through a private trust. Said it was for the bridges yet to be built. Her heart swelled. "He never told me." "Perhaps he wanted you to discover it yourself," the official said kindly. Later that afternoon, Lydia visited the school. It was small but vibrant, children reciting English phrases, adults practicing Arabic, laughter echoing down the hall. On one wall, painted in elegant script, were the words, "Peace begins with a word." Lydia's hand flew to her mouth. She stood there, trembling, as realization washed over her. Khalid had carried her words across the world quietly, faithfully turning them into living truth. A teacher noticed her and smiled. "You must be Miss Carter," she said. "He told us you'd come one day." Lydia's eyes filled with tears. "He told you about me." "Oh yes," the teacher said warmly. "He said you were the one who taught him to listen." That night, Lydia stood by the Nile. The air shimmered with heat and the scent of jasmine. The river moved slow and endless, like time itself. She thought about everything: the hotel, the language that started it all, the bridge they'd built between worlds. for the first time since his death. She didn't feel the weight of loss. She felt presence vast, quiet, eternal. She whispered softly, "You finished what we started." Then she added, with a smile, "And now it's my turn." Over the following months, Lydia restored the house, turning it into the Khalid al-Rahman Institute for Cultural Understanding. Students from around the world came to learn not just language, but empathy, how to speak, listen, and live with grace. Sometimes, when she walked through the courtyard at dusk, she imagined Khalid sitting under the fig tree, notebook in hand, watching quietly with that half-smile of his. And in those moments, she would whisper in Arabic, "Al-Kalimatu Nur." The word is light, because in the end, that was what he had left her. Not riches, not fame, but a light that never dimmed. Years passed. The world changed, as it always does. Skyscrapers rose higher, languages blended faster, and the noise of modern life grew louder. But amid all that noise, the bridge project remained not as an empire, but as a living idea. People often asked Lydia what it felt like to see her story ripple across the globe. They expected words like pride or success. She always smiled and said, "It feels like peace." By now, her hair had streaks of silver. She wore it tied back the same way she did when she was a maid at the Crystal Avenue Hotel. Her walk was slower, but her presence carried a quiet authority that drew respect wherever she went. One bright morning, she returned to New York after several months in Cairo. The city felt familiar, yet different, the same pulse beneath its new rhythm. As her taxi turned onto Fifth Avenue, she saw it, the hotel where everything had begun. The sign had been renovated, its gold letters shining in the sun. The Crystal Avenue Hotel. She hadn't stepped inside in nearly 15 years. Something inside her stirred. She asked the driver to stop. The lobby smelled faintly of polished marble and lilies, just as it always had. The chandeliers glittered above her, throwing prisms of light onto the white floors. Time, she thought, has such a gentle way of coming back. A young concierge approached her with a practiced smile. "Welcome to the Crystal Avenue. Ma'am, are you checking in?" Lydia smiled. "No, I used to work here." His expression softened. "Really? You must have seen some history." She looked around the reception desk, the sweeping staircase, the grand piano by the bar. "More than I realized at the time," she said. A sound caught her attention and laughter from the banquet hall down the corridor. Curious, she followed it. Inside, a corporate gala was underway. The air buzzed with chatter, champagne glasses clinking. A man in a sleek suit stood at the front, speaking in rapid English about innovation, leadership, success. Then, without warning, he switched languages to Arabic. The room fell silent. It was the same kind of silence Lydia remembered from that night long ago. A silence that wasn't empty, but uncertain. A silence that asked, "Who will understand?" She stood at the doorway, heart pounding. The man paused, scanning the audience. "Does anyone here understand what I just said?" he asked, and before she could think, Lydia spoke, her voice calm, warm, familiar, carried across the room. "I do." Heads turned, the speaker's eyes lit up, surprised and delighted. "You speak Arabic enough to answer a question," she said, smiling. "What did I say then?" he challenged gently. Half teasing, she smiled, her tone steady. "You said that true leadership begins with listening, not commanding." The man's smile widened. "Exactly." Applause broke out, and laughter followed. The tension dissolved into warmth. The man walked toward her. "You must be a teacher." "Something like that," she said. A woman at one of the tables whispered, "That's Lydia Carter from the Bridge Project soon." Others recognized her. The murmurs spread like ripples across the hall. Lydia laughed softly, embarrassed but touched. She had spent her life giving others a voice, and now hers was echoing back. The host invited her to the stage. At first she declined, but the room's energy drew her in. She took the microphone, her hands steady, her heart full. Many years ago, she began. I stood in this very room. I was a maid then, invisible, quiet, just trying to do my job. A man spoke in Arabic, and no one understood him, but something in me did. So I answered. The room was silent again, the same way it had been all those years ago. That one moment, she continued, changed 2 lives, his and mine. Not because of wealth or luck, but because we listened. And from that small act of listening, a bridge was built, one that still stands today. She paused, looking at the crowd. We live in a world full of noise, everyone speaking, no one hearing. But every person here has the power to silence a room, not with authority, but with understanding. That's how we change things. That's how we find one another. When she finished, the applause was soft at first, then grew into a standing ovation. Some people wiped their eyes. Others simply stood in silence, as if words were too small. Afterward, the young speaker approached her again. "That was beautiful," he said. "Did you really work here?" She smiled. "Yes, and I learned more in these halls than any classroom could teach." He extended his hand. "My name's Amir. My father used to speak about a man named Khalid al-Rahman. He said Khalid taught him that language is a bridge." Lydia froze for a moment, then smiled softly. "Then I think your father and I knew the same man." Amir nodded, eyes glistening. "My father said Khalid once met a woman who changed how he saw the world." Lydia chuckled quietly. "He changed mine too." The conversation lingered, full of memory and meaning. Before she left, Amir handed her a small notebook. "It's something my father kept his notes from the early days of the Bridge Project. I thought you should have it." When she stepped outside, the sky was turning gold. She sat on a bench by the hotel entrance, opened the notebook, and smiled at the familiar handwriting. Inside was a quote written across the first page. "Every bridge begins with 2 people willing to meet halfway." She closed the notebook gently. For a long time, she simply sat there, watching the city flow by, people hurrying, laughing, living. Later that evening, she returned to the Hudson River overlook, the same spot she and Khalid used to visit. The bench was still there, older now, the paint chipped. She sat down, breathing in the crisp air, and watched the lights ripple on the water. From her bag, she took out a small silver pendant. It had belonged to Khalid, the one engraved with the phrase, "Silence is not stillness." She held it tightly, then whispered, "You see, Khalid, the world listened after all." A faint breeze brushed her face, and she smiled, feeling the weight of years ease from her shoulders. In the distance, the city hummed 1,000 voices in 1,000 tongues, overlapping but harmonious. And somewhere in that great chorus, she heard what she'd always believed, that understanding, once awakened, never dies. As she rose to leave, a little girl nearby pointed to her and said to her mother, "Who's that lady?" Her mother smiled. "Someone who helped people talk to each other." The child nodded thoughtfully. "That's nice." Lydia smiled to herself and walked away, her steps slow but sure. The wind carried faint echoes of laughter, the same melody she once heard from a distant ballroom long ago. She didn't need applause, nor memory. The bridge was complete, and in that final moment, the room, the city, the whole world, it seemed fell silent once more, not from confusion, not from awe, but from peace. When the noise fades, what remains isn't wealth or fame. It's the quiet courage to understand another human being. Lydia's story teaches us that language isn't just words. It's compassion, it's listening. It's the invisible bridge that connects souls across culture, color, and class. Khalid learned that even the richest voice means nothing if it can't speak kindness. And Lydia, once unseen, reminded the world that true strength is often wrapped in humility and service, in patience, in heart. Maybe you've felt like her working hard, unseen, waiting for the world to notice what you already know you're capable of. Or maybe you've been like him, successful, but longing for something more genuine than applause. This story is your mirror. It asks a quiet question. When the world stops listening, will you still speak from love? Because every small act of empathy, every moment we choose to see someone, instead of judging them, builds a bridge. And those bridges outlast everything else. Thank you for watching, for feeling, and for remembering what truly matters. If this story touched you, please like, share, and subscribe, not for numbers, but for the stories yet to be told, the hearts yet to be heard, and the bridges we've yet to build together.